This is Attorney Sharp Raleigh, and we're going to discuss a little bit about the possibilities of IT consulting companies. Basically, not only IT but any consulting agency placing people on different location. How can it be possible for them to use their workforce without violating the new OPT rule as per the form I-983. So as you can see, first of all, we're going to go um, the new rule actually is the problem with that form 983. It's an attestation. So when you look at it from a first look, a bird's view perspective, most people were thinking that companies will not be able to hire people. But then as you dig deep inside of it, and I did an article on that stating that it's not impossible, but it would be very difficult, still very difficult, a lot of more burden. But at the end of the day, a solution can be found, and it seems more and more minds are coming together and finding a solution. And these are my proposition on the form. As you know, for those who don't, you probably already had to look at the form. So I'm not going to go over the form, but at the end I'll go over the form. But right now, let us go over the solution. And the solution here is how can basically IT consulting or consulting companies actually hire OPT 24-month student. So first of all, issues with the new OPT. Those are the main issues that we see, and if you look at the form also, you will see those issues will come up. You have to make sure that you're not displacing any temporary or permanent workers. As you know, there was a lot of discussion and a lot of argument from those who were against OPT, stating that OPT students are taking the jobs not only of permanent residents, US citizens, but H1B workers. This is not really true, in fact, but this is what they are claiming. So that might not be a big issue for any company to prove, because unless they are really having other issues, but we will go into details on that. Pay the prevailing wage. I use the word prevailing wage because that's the best I can kind of use to compare, but it's not prevailing wage that they're talking about here. They're talking about compensation has to commensurate with the market. For example, you cannot pay someone who is a highline IT engineer with a STEM OPT as you would pay someone with no experience and someone who's going to be an administrative person. So be careful on that. Prepare the training plan. The form itself has this training plan. The form itself is known to be a training plan, but it's mostly an attestation. So you need to have a plan to how to do that, and we will go into those details in a minute. Then you have to state your goals and how the goals of the student, not your goals. At the end of the day, the OPT, as you see, is as you can understand, is the optional practical training, not a work permit per se. So you need to still make sure that the students are going to get something in terms of knowledge, of training to enhance basically, or to at least achieve what they have studied. And we're going to go into that too. And of course, a big one, the work site monitoring. This is something that is really the part which is scaring most of the consulting companies, because they don't know how to really cover that. And all those are covered in the section, I think 3 to 6 on the form 983. So please check it, and we're going to go over the form in a minute too. So next, first of all, making sure that the temporary workers are not displaced. Make sure that the company you're working for, or if your company has had a massive layoff, a lot of people were laid off, and especially H1B, L1, any non-immigrant visa workers, anybody who has a regular work permit, or someone who's a permanent resident or a US citizen. You don't want to hire STEM OPT students, because that is going to harm you. And if you're planning to basically fire in the near future, you also will be facing some issues, because remember, once you sign this form, you will be in the database and they will be watching you. Like we say, the big brother will be watching. So now and if you're a student, make sure your employer is not hiring other people to replace you, mostly people who are in H1B and L1. Of course, firing doesn't mean being fired because of good cause. For example, that person is not working and things like that. No, we are talking about layoffs here. So now the next one, pay the right wages. It's very important that you make sure that you get the guideline, and most of the OPT students will be entry level, so you can pay basically level 1. If you look at the FLC data center book or the ONIT book, you should be able to get what the code and the salary there, so make sure you're paying that amount. So I am not going to go into that because every time we do H1B we do that, so make sure as an employer you are doing that, and state the goals and how the goals will be met. This is another important factor because at the end of the day, like I mentioned, OPT means optional practical training, so it is set to help people students to train. It is not set to get cheap labor, so you need to make sure that as an employer or you need to make sure, or as a student, make sure your employer is detailing how the goals will be met by having you on board with them. For example, one idea is to break it like every 3 months how this goal will be achieved, every 6 months how the other goals will be achieved, and keep dividing it. We even recommend putting kind of a flow chart or a graph or something that you can attach and also explain on the form itself, but also attach something simple where it can easily relate how you're going to really kind of step by step achieve your goals or achieve the goal of the student. So make sure it's very important, but that should not be very difficult because that's how people learn through experience. So first 3 months they might be doing basics, the next other 3 months they might be doing a little bit higher level, and keep going on, moving on like that. So now the work site monitoring, this is a big one that is scaring everybody. I have kind of done some research from my side, and the word monitoring, if you look at it from the dictionary's perspective, I think even Webster, monitoring refers to devices. That means if you are using certain devices, and I know many companies do use them to log in and log out their employees, especially when they are working from home. They use that to monitor their time, but they also use that to monitor their work and secure their work. Of course, that might be some issues of privacy, issues of intellectual property that you have to deal with your end client or whomever you're placing your students to. So make sure that you have a good device. That would be helpful. Skype and things like that can be very helpful. And of course, a reporting on a daily basis is what they are looking for pretty much, although they have not mentioned it. The second option that I've seen is possible is, of course, to have someone physically on the location where you basically going to monitor on a daily basis the work of the STEM OPT student, and that would be the best if you can have that, but most of the time it would be too costly or even impossible for the company end client, to allow that. But if they allow that, I've heard some cases where they do have people on site, so that makes things a lot easier because then that person can attest on the form 983. Note that the form 983, the employer and the supervisor monitor who's monitoring do not have to be the same person, so you can always use someone else to do that. The third option is to have a floating employee or a manager that goes around to check on different locations, but that might not be practical if you're working on very remote locations. But it might be possible in a small close area that person or the employer himself can go and check, but it has to be someone who has knowledge of the work and has enough knowledge to basically monitor the student. And the last one, what I mentioned, is kind of a really pushing the envelope, but you can still try it if the employer is willing to place their own monitor, and that employer, the end client, and they have this person sign on the form. That might be helpful. There might be a lot of permutations there, combination of all of the above. It can be also other devices, and maybe someone will come up with some kind of software. But at the end of the day, as long as we satisfy the rule of what they are mentioning as monitoring, we should be good to go. So now, having said that, if you look at all this is highly possible now with technology, with the ability to monitor things. I think at this point it might be a good chance for students to actually get a chance on their STEM OPT. So we hope that this will be helpful. Again, this is just what I'm giving you are just suggestions, and there might be obstacles or ease in the future until we see the USCI start denying those OPT STEM extensions or coming to the workplace and start taking them away. We can really base our ideas on the assumption that we should be able to get things moving using those tools that we have mentioned. And again, these are just purely educational. You should not act or refrain to act solely on the information provided. No attorney-client relationship is created by this presentation. And quickly before I go, I want to really kind of go over the form itself. As you can see here, I downloaded the form, the 683, and you see I'll go section by section here. Here it is. The section 1, easy. These are just information. Section 2. This section 2 is very important. You need to know what you mean by certifying. What you're doing is under penalty of perjury. So you better be careful. Remember the rules of 212. If you lie on this, it will come back and bite you. So make sure that you mean what you sign and you follow the rules really to the letter. And you will, for example, for one, you have reviewed the form and you understand it. You will notify DSO if the employer is not compliant. You understand that DHS, which is the Department of Homeland Security, may deny to terminate your STEM OPT. Remember, I was saying until they start coming in, and as long as if you're compliant with the law, they should not be able to do that. But be careful that you are compliant. And other important part, which is very important, of course, it has to be directly related to your STEM degree. You cannot basically just take, even if it is another another field in STEM, it has to be related to your specific field. For example, you cannot have a degree in microbiology and you're working as a computer engineer. So be careful on that. And also you're testifying that you will notify the DSO, the designated school official, any changes from this plan. For example, remember we were talking about the plan here, how you will detail it. If in case you're changing anything, you're going to inform the DSO. How do you inform that? Probably through a letter or an email, and give the details of it. And now section 4, which starts basically from really kind of section 3, where the employer really gets involved. Here we have the compensation, the issues of compensation. It is very important that you meet the code in the industry and also how much you're paying, and the employer has to give every details on them. And this is what's kind of a little bit worrying all the consulting company, because they're disclosing a lot of information. And here, of course, the employer certification. Now for the employer, as I mentioned earlier, you got to be careful what you are certifying. And this is where you just have to, for example, if you go in the ONET book, you take the job, make sure you're compliant, and make sure you explain how this will achieve the goal of the student, not just a matter of that. And you are basically certifying here that you will make sure that you will meet all the requirements, you're not going to miss on anything. So here you have space to write, and then training. Now the training part, student role. How the role is directly relating to the enhancing the student knowledge obtained through his or qualifying STEM degree. That's a problem that we see many times, because they tend to put them in general practice, and that's not a good idea. So all these are very important. So make sure they don't miss the goals and objectives. This is something which needs to be like I mentioned there. You need to make sure that you explain this, how you're going to divide the goals over time, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 15 months, etc., and up till to the 24 month. You can also add here, see attached, you can put a chart or a graph or something which is very visual to explain the goals. That will help. And employer oversight, this is the part that we were mentioning earlier. All the stuff that we are talking about here is was we were talking about earlier on the slide, that how you're going to really monitor and all the options and measures of assessment. So now you have to also explain how you're going to assess their work at the end. That's very important, because just because you are, but that goes also with the monitoring and also goals and objectives. So make sure you meet that, and any additional remark you can put here, see attach and things like that. And at the end you will have to sign on it, and basically that can be the employer official with signatory authority, and this needs to be signed. And then you will have the section, these are all the section of the law that they have mentioned here. So be careful, read this very carefully, because any failure there will cost you really dearly. And evaluation of student progress, that's another part of the form which is important to fill. And I know people will tend to cut and paste from other people, but make sure it is custom made, and this is where it's important to have a lawyer do that for you, because this is not you can just cut and paste. You make one single mistake, you are swearing under penalty of perjury, which carries criminal charges, so be careful there. Having said that, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for listening to this, and anything I'm telling you today again is for educational purposes only. You should not act or refrain to act solely on the information provided. You should contact an attorney if you have any questions. Good luck to you. Thank you.